Hello, my name's Craig Fuchs, and welcome to the Colchester Podcast with Martin Goss. It's our first of a series of podcasts that we're going to be recording in the run-up to the general election, which we're expecting perhaps possibly towards the end of next year. Martin is a local councillor for Colchester, and he's also the parliamentary candidate for the Liberal Democrats. And in order to help you to get to know him a little bit better and also to understand some of the political issues facing Colchester and nationally, Martin's going to give us his thoughts and insight on a range of topics. Today, we're going to be talking about the candidate for the Conservative Party. James Cracknell has been recently announced that will be running for the Conservative Party in Colchester. We're going to be talking about some of the comments that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak made specifically about the trans community, and also the recent announcements about HS2 and transport. So over to you, Martin. Just give us a very, very brief overview of your political career.
Thank you. So I was first elected in 2008 in Mile End, and I had lived in Mile End since 2005, but lived in Colchester for over 40 years, having lived in Prettygate and grown up there, went to school there, and also then moved and bought my first house in St John's in the year 2000. So it shows how long ago that was. So I've lived and worked in Colchester all my life. I moved here when I was 4, and I've been here ever since. In terms of the political side of things, I just got involved because I saw issues in my local neighbourhood. When I moved there, I bought a new house in 2005 to be nearer the station because I was working in London or moving to a job in London at the time. And there was just some issues, and I kind of started a residents association and then just got drawn into being active, and then got asked to stand for election in 2008 and have never looked back and loved it and enjoyed it ever since, representing your local community, dealing with so many different issues in the local community, and also dealing with things more strategically around housing, planning and the waste services in Colchester. I've gone on to be a cabinet member in more recent years, dealing with that more strategically for Colchester.
Excellent. So you've been selected to be the parliamentary candidate for the Liberal Democrat for the next general election. Tell us a bit about how that came to be.
Yes, so it's something that a lot of people that have served in local government, local community seem to do. That was how Bob Russell came to be our MP. He in effect went through his apprenticeship and did many decades of service to Colchester, and then became the MP in 1997. So I guess you could say my route has been similar.
Yeah.
And I just decided that I can see the link between national legislation and more local issues in Colchester around infrastructure, around pavement parking, around how benefits or decisions made in Parliament can affect local people. So, for instance, the amount of food bank vouchers that we have to issue because people can't afford to eat.
Yeah.
And that affects local residents. And, it's horrific actually even having to have food banks in this time, but we have 10 of them in Colchester, and that is not a record to be proud of. So in effect, it's the motivation of being involved in this for many years that pushed me to stand for the Liberal Democrats, and the members of the Liberal Democrats who make those decisions, like other political parties, chose me to be the Colchester candidate, and I will be standing whenever that general election is called.
Excellent. Because Colchester, historically, you mentioned Sir Bob Russell there. How long was Sir Bob MP?
He was an MP for 18 years,
Wow.
re-elected with an increased majority every time. He had a huge personal vote because of the thousands of bits of casework he did and the many thousands of people he helped in his tenure. And, he has been held up certainly by people as a really good constituency MP who put Colchester first.
Absolutely. And he still does a fantastic amount of work in a kind of non-political capacity now, doesn't he?
That's right. He's the High Sheriff, High Steward for Colchester, has been for some years. He does lots of tours of Colchester. He's just done fundraising for some statues in the High Street to commemorate Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star being written in Colchester. So Colchester is just steeped in history, and it's much more than just being the Roman settlement and Queen Boudica, burning it all down, of course.
Yeah. So Colchester is this kind of very proud history, both in terms of the longer term history, the Romans and the history with Boudicca and the like. But in terms of politics, Colchester for a long time was a Liberal Democrat stronghold, wasn't it? Even throughout the rest of Essex, which is a largely blue on the map. What do you think changed when?
So obviously the current MP Will Quince was elected in 2015. That was a surprise, I think, to a number of people, including Will Quince himself. But I think after the coalition, I think it left people confused because there wasn't a more of the same or less of the same on the ballot paper. And I think also with the leadership of the Labour Party, people weren't interested in allowing the Labour Party to take over government. So I just think there was a huge swing to the Conservatives, and Bob Russell paid the price for that. More a national issue, with the tide going out for the Liberal Democrats and the tide coming in more for the Conservatives, and the tide certainly didn't come in for Labour in that election, and they haven't had an MP in Colchester since 1945, I believe.
No, the parliamentary Labour Party don't seem to focus particularly heavily, in my experience, on campaigning in Colchester. It always seems to be that perhaps they've resigned themselves to the fact that Colchester has been for 80 years a Conservative or Liberal seat.
That's right. And I think with the change in the boundary that's just been done, has just removed Old Heath and Hythe. So that is no longer also part of the Colchester constituency. And that was done because of the growing housing and population numbers, because they have to keep the constituency seats roughly the same size. So that's just been approved, and that will stand for the next general election, where Colchester constituency will have yet another ward removed from it. A bit like Stanway was removed many years ago and moved into Witham, which of course makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but that's the way they cut the parliamentary boundaries.
Okay. What impact do you think that boundary change will have at the next election?
Benefits certainly the Liberal Democrats and me personally hugely, because that's just removed a fairly heavy voting Labour ward. And that means that Labour has lost thousands of votes, which means it's even more of a challenge for them to win the election in whenever it is called.
So Stanway remains out of the Colchester constituency then?
That's right. It has been for certainly, I think, at least 10 years plus. It's still part of Colchester, still part of the city council, still well represented as an urban ward, but it just happens to sit in the seat of Witham and Preeti Patel, which obviously is quite interesting because it's on the border of the seat.
Yeah. Okay. So Will Quince, the current MP, he's stepping down. He's not. He's said that for quite some time now.
That's right.
It seems unusual because he's had 3 ministerial posts, and his last majority, I think, was 9,000.
That's right.
And certainly some of his actions as an outsider looking in would appear to be somebody that was looking at their working life to be a career politician. So it seems very, very unusual that he'd be stepping down from a ministerial post and such a strong majority that he had at last time.
Yes, indeed. Been a big supporter of Boris Johnson, that then came out against Boris Johnson and then went straight back into the same Boris Johnson government after Johnson said he was stepping away within 24 hours.
Sorry, Martin.
So yeah, I think your statement is right. It was more about the political career than maybe putting all the wants and needs of Colchester residents first, as Bob Russell always used to, because he was not interested in a political career. He was interested in Colchester. And I think people in Colchester realise that, because I've certainly seen a lot of comments. Certainly people have stopped me in the street and mentioned it and said it's about time we had an MP that put Colchester and its residents first, not their political career. And I think that's what people will be looking for when they vote at the next general election, and who has that potential record not to try and climb what is a greasy pole of government.
Yeah. What would motivate somebody to step down from their their political career with such a strong majority when somebody's been.
Well, the only person that will truly know that is the MP himself, but he's cited family life needs to come first, and there could be some truth in that. But also, he may well have realised that it's going to be a bit of a challenge to get re-elected with the current state of the national leadership and government, because it's in free fall in the current polling. You know, they're 20, 25 points behind Labour at the moment. And their party conference hasn't improved things, which normally you get a bounce. And I guess that could have meant he lost the seat. And that 9,000 majority was only so high because of because in 2019 it was all about Brexit, and Colchester, sadly, is a Leave constituency, and no political party is going to, take us back into Europe at the moment. Nobody is going to put that as policy at the next general election, because, to be frank, there are too many other issues to fix. But in Colchester, I think he would have struggled with his voting record and the climb up the pole of government. I think people realise what's been going on, and I don't think people like that.
Mm. So that he's stepping down because he doesn't rate his chances at the moment.
Well, I mean, that's personal conjecture. That's not what he said. He said it's down to family. And if so, respect family absolutely is a high priority. But I also suspect that, when you're reapplying for your job, which in effect, re-standing in an election, no different if I re-stand for Colchester City Council, you're reapplying for that position to be endorsed by the people. And if the people don't want you, they won't endorse you, or they won't endorse the government that you're part of. So I suspect that probably some of that came into play as well, because it's I'm sure not particularly gratifying to put all that work in and then lose.
No, of course. So it's been recently announced that the next candidate is James Cracknell, who's obviously incredibly famous for his Olympic achievements. What are your thoughts about having a non-Colchester resident and celebrity being put forward as a potential MP, and somebody that, to my basic research, doesn't seem to have a huge political career behind them? What are your thoughts?
No. So no, thank you. So Colchester obviously has welcomed many residents over history and in more recent times. And I think, though, that the people of Colchester prefer to have somebody that's got a more local relationship with the city or the town that they're going to stand for. And I think Colchester is no different. And I don't think that the Conservatives have done themselves any favours. They had a very good candidate in Darius Laws, who I know, and he has got an excellent history with Colchester, and he knows the history of Colchester really well. He's very passionate about it. And they overlooked him, surprisingly, to go for a celebrity. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I was selected by Liberal Democrat members who are paid up party members. This would have been the same for the Colchester Conservatives, the same Colchester Conservatives who I think supported Liz Truss as Prime Minister. So, it's down to the party members who they select, and they've selected somebody from, I think, the West London area, who, if you look and do a bit of research and use Google, you can see that Mr. Cracknell was only chasing Henley only a couple of months ago, and was saying how proud and honoured he would be to stand there. And all of a sudden, he's now turned up in Colchester and has now got the seat, because I think the Conservatives view a celebrity as being, not particularly famous celebrity recently, but somebody who's got a past recognition that might be the only chance they've got for winning Colchester, rather than somebody that's got a local pedigree and a local reputation, and somebody like Darius did. And I think, to be fair, they've made a huge mistake in not choosing somebody local with a name and a recognition and a huge passion for this city.
Yeah, it does. It is quite jarring to think that the local Conservative Party would choose somebody on that basis rather than somebody that has got that passion for the town, or at least lives in Colchester, or certainly nearby.
Indeed. And I think for the Colchester seat, I heard there were 40 applicants from across the country applying for the Colchester seat.
Right.
So they would have been whittled down by a process. There is a process that political parties follow for dealing with candidates and applications. Now, the Liberal Democrats did the same in Colchester. There were a number of people that applied, and then obviously it goes to the members to vote. So I think they whittled that list down, and then there was a short list, and then the Conservative members would have voted. So it's ultimately their responsibility for who they selected, and that's part of being a member of a political party. That's one of the benefits of joining. You get to select and vote on more local matters, although clearly the person selected is not local at all.
Yeah, what would you say to somebody that's perhaps a Conservative voter historically that is now being presented with the option in the next general election of voting for, say, you or the Labour candidate, or somebody that isn't from Colchester and perhaps can't have the same personal investment in Colchester if they're not from the town, from the city?
No, that's right. I've got 45 years invested in Colchester, and over 16 of those on the public front line, dealing with issues that matter, and also some pretty difficult issues that are more strategic, which obviously not everyone will agree with. So I've got the experience of being local. What affects you affects me. Congestion, issues with pollution, concerns over the city centre, ever changing into more of a place of leisure, and obviously the changing face of retail. All these things are local matters, but what you also get with me is you get that national understanding, around challenges with the NHS getting to see a doctor or a dentist, and that's no criticism of doctors or dentists at all, because they do an absolutely fantastic job. It's more the bureaucracy, the process, the lack of support, I think, for the professionals on the front line. And I get to see it, I get to know what's going on, and I get to speak to local leaders and hear their concerns and how their next MP needs to be representing Colchester. And I've got those links, I've got that knowledge, and I've got that passion and drive and reputation of getting things done.
I think that's something that certainly comes across from the things that you share on your social media, is that you do have these long-standing personal and professional connections with all the people that matter in Colchester, and you're certainly very proactive in going out and meeting those people and listening to them. For somebody new coming in that doesn't have those connections, it would seem to me to be very difficult to hit the ground running.
Yeah, because there's a learning curve, and you're absolutely right that it takes time to build those relationships, to get those appointments, and to truly understand all the nuances in some of the issues. Because you can be told something, but you've really got to dig into it and understand the facts properly. And I always say facts first, because you can be given a number of different versions of something, and in between somewhere there is the truth. So, and that's what you need to get to find out exactly how you can try and fix it or take things forward. And let's be frank, you can't fix everything. And I'm always straight with people to say, we can do that, we can do it this way, or we can't, or I'll always try and find a way around to get something done. But you can't fix everything. And I think it's about being honest with people, or looking at different ways to cut through some of the bureaucracy sometimes. But at the end of the day, there are rules and regulations and policy that has to be followed, but it's how you can try and influence to change them for the better.
I think most people are happy and comfortable with that as a concept, that you can't change everything immediately. But I think the point I'm making is that it would be very difficult to change anything if you don't have those connections, those relationships, or you don't know the subtleties and the nuances of the town. You and I are both from Mile End, and that is a very proud kind of corner of Liberal Democrat following and support. And then there's different areas of the town that will have of the city. I still can't get used to saying city. I know it's been a while now, but I still it catches me off guard. But there are different areas. I grew up in Monkwick, and that's very different to Mile End, but it's still part of the same city. And you know the differences between perhaps those two areas. But for somebody brand new that doesn't know Colchester, if you say, I went to school in Monkwick, that's not going to mean anything to you.
No. No. And the history of the schools, the Ofsted inspections that would have happened in those schools over time. I went to Philip Morant, and that school at the moment is performing really well. Historically, it's had its challenges, like many schools in Colchester, and I will have a lot of that history and know why that's maybe happened, and then there's been a change of leadership or academy trust or whatever might have happened. Somebody that hasn't got that time invested won't have that history, and it is important to understand some of that history. And you've got the history ingrained in somebody like Sir Bob Russell, who's still got a lot more history of Colchester than I would have, because he's lived here a lot longer than I have, and so you've also got those encyclopedic memories that you can go back further if you need to. There might be a piece of unregistered land, for instance, that's not being maintained, and somebody like Sir Bob would have that knowledge. So it's also knowing where to go if you don't have that knowledge, and that's only something you build up over a long time with networks, etc. And it's no different than working, in my professional capacity. You build up those networks in the company you work for, and you kind of cut through it, and you know who to go to. Same as somebody who starts new in a role isn't going to have a clue how the scaffolding of the organisation is organised, and I know my way around the scaffolding, they wouldn't. So it's the same principle, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the idea of having somebody with that experience, it counts for something. It really does, to have that knowledge, to have that experience, and for somebody like yourself that is really invested a lot in just the stuff that you do locally, the litter picking and the personal investment you have within the town. Anyway, so I wanted to talk to you about that. I also wanted to talk to you about some of the comments that were made by Rishi Sunak about gender and the issues that perhaps face the trans community, which before we started recording today, you spoke to me a bit about the LGBTQ community in Colchester. Just give us an overview of what and Pride. Just tell us a bit about what's happening for that community in Colchester at the moment.
Yes, Colchester is a very multicultural, open, transparent community, and obviously growing, and the LGBTQ community is a big part of that. Pride every year, held at First Sight. I don't think First Sight is going to be big enough for it going forwards, because it's such a big event where thousands of people attend. It's a very loving, caring atmosphere, and people can just enjoy it, mix, and it's an absolutely fabulous event, and something that I've been to pre-COVID and post-COVID, when the events have been held, and will continue to go and be very supportive of the community. They're part of Colchester. We also have the Outhouse, which is a charity that's been running for many, many years to help people if they're obviously going through, working out where they're working out through the transgender issues that they might be experiencing, and they will get counselling and support. And it's a really, really brilliant charity. And again, they've helped thousands of people, and they hold events, and it's a fantastic charity that, again, I visited and I support, and I think they do great work in Colchester, which shows there's a community and a need for that support. And for the Prime Minister to go around, in effect, stirring up transphobia is not helpful in something that obviously affects many people, and needs support. And certainly that's something I do support, because it goes very much with Colchester's history. Colchester is the most multicultural city in Essex because of the university. Obviously, some of the people that attend Pride, are students in our great city, as well as residents in Colchester, and they all deserve support. And that's definitely something I'm very passionate about, ensuring everybody is supported fairly and equitably, and looked after, and not denigrated at all, which is in effect what the Prime Minister's done, and also stirred up Suella Braverman as well with her speech. And it just doesn't help matters at a time when society, coming out of Brexit, coming out of COVID, has its challenges. We don't need to add to them unnecessarily and unfairly. It's just not appropriate.
I think there's a perhaps a knowledge gap that the Prime Minister was saying about that there's only two genders, and the language he was using isn't, to my understanding, the language of issues that people that are trans face. Yes, we're aware that there are two biological sexes. Everybody knows that. That isn't what the experience of trans people is, that they don't feel comfortable in the sex that they were assigned at birth. So to come out and say those types of comments, when, for me anyway, it's still trying to learn and understand a bit more about trans, and to educate myself from my professional work separate to this, to come out with those remarks just seems incredibly, well, it doesn't seem to reflect my understanding of, which I understand is just a layperson's, but the issues that that community faces, and it seems to be very naive almost.
Yeah, it's not helpful, and I think it's one of those speeches that takes the UK back about 50 years, and there's been such great advances of integration and the community in that time that we just can't afford to wind the clock back, and that in effect is what the Prime Minister is doing to try and appease the far right of his party to try and get re-voted in next year, and that isn't going to happen. And certainly, all he's going to do is alienate himself further from voters, and that is not helpful. So it's just playing to the crowd for the party politics, and to be frank, it's just totally wrong. And totally
there will be some people that perhaps are listening to this or watching this that his comments resonate with, perhaps because they're not as comfortable or as understanding of the issues that the trans community faces. There will be people out there, understandably, that those comments resonate with. And we've also seen from what you said earlier that there is this huge LGBTQ community in Colchester, and it feels very divisive.
Yeah, I think it is divisive. I think it's dangerous, and look at the damage that happened to society over splitting over Brexit. And this is no better. It's inflammatory. It's taking an issue and it's trying to cut it down the middle. And what we need is people to understand. Won't necessarily agree. Not everyone's ever going to agree on something, but people at least need to understand and see both sides and always respect there are two sides. But this is just divisive, and I don't think it helps binding communities together, which is exactly what councillors and MPs and community leaders should do, not take a massive axe and try and split it down the middle. That's exactly what he's done, and that to me is not acceptable.
There's also for me the issue of timing of that speech, which is incredibly inflammatory and it is incredibly divisive, as we've already said. But it comes around the same time as these announcements about HS2 and the costs or losses that are happening there. My personal opinion is that perhaps this speech was made at that time in order to try and distract from another piece of news, which is the costs or the losses that are going to be incurred as a result of the cancellation of great chunks of the HS2 programme. What are your thoughts on that? I know that's my opinion.
No, I agree. I think there's always a thing in government about burying bad news. So you end up releasing all sorts of things to the press and they get buried. And I think you're absolutely right that this is just smoke screening where he's making headlines to try and bury the bad news. And I think, the cancellation of HS2, the Birmingham to Manchester link is bad news for our future infrastructure. I know it was not due to finish till about 2041, but it's a massive investment in our future. And if we're trying to deal with a climate emergency, rail travel and high-speed rail travel is part of that future. And now that future is in jeopardy because the land is being sold off. And I think the other thing is there were 400 properties where people were displaced. Now, 400 doesn't sound a lot, but when it's your home or your community, that is where there've been compulsory purchase orders done. So now those people have had to be resettled elsewhere. Imagine all the stress and anxiety they've suffered. And then all that land is just being parcelled up and sold off. For what? So they're trying to get some of the money back in by selling off the land almost immediately. So even if an incoming government next year, which is not going to be Conservative, let's be frank, can't resurrect that project because all the land will have been sold off. Could you imagine trying to do another compulsory purchase on land that you've owned and then sold off again? I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. So unfortunately, they have killed that off for the £36 billion that's saved, allegedly, to put into other projects. Now, some of those other projects were happening anyway. Some of the money and projects appear to be recycled, and there's not really any detail around exactly what is going to be delivered. There's been some headlines. There's been, the new Liverpool line that's been announced. There's been, a potential tram system that's been announced. There's been £2 bus fares being extended, and then there's been some road building that's also been unblocked. Whereas 6 months ago the projects were kicked out, but that money is now going into putting more capacity onto the roads. Now, I talked about and mentioned about a climate emergency. Yesterday was the hottest day of October, the hottest October for 5 years. There's no question that climate change exists, and building more roads and creating more traffic when you could have got some people onto trains, onto high-speed rail, is not the answer to dealing with a climate emergency, which is going to be on our doorsteps a lot quicker than 2050 or 2041. It's happening now, and we need to be dealing with it.
Yeah, I think experientially, when we're walking around in shirt sleeves in the middle of October, you and I are old enough to remember when it was freezing cold and tipping it down with rain in October. And just through your own experience, we can all see that the climate is certainly changing. That the summer, it seems to be being pushed back almost into a different season. It's very disconcerting to see, and I think most people now are able to make the connection between the environment and the and pollution and the way in which climate is changing. And it is very concerning to see a big project like this that may contribute in part to a reduction of cars and therefore emissions and hopefully an improvement to building new roads and extending new roads, which is what we've all come to understand as being the opposite of what we need.
Yeah, and I've got nothing, and you have to support all types of travel. So I certainly don't want to sound anti-car, because I'm not, but you've got to have that balance. And rail is a great investment. It's lots of other countries have got hugely fantastic, speedy, cost-effective rail infrastructure. You go to the Netherlands, it's amazing, it's quick, it's cheap. Japan, and they've had these for decades. And they're so far ahead of us at the moment, and we have the ability to do it because we've done it in London with the new infrastructure that's been delivered there. The new Queen Elizabeth line, or the Elizabeth line. We did it, and it has made a huge difference to getting people across London and out, and doing it in a cost-effective manner, and dealing with the rail capacity issues that we've had there for many decades. So it just shows actually it adds value, and the business case will stack up long term. But if we axe it, we've just done this, we've just affected the future generation again. And it's all short termism. That's what we've done.
Yeah. What about the cost of rail? So I know many people that we're watching will be commuting into London, and certainly my experience of using Greater Anglia trains from Colchester to London or wherever, the cost just increases exponentially every year. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the reason we're being hit is because the government won't move away from increasing rail tickets by the cost of inflation. So if the cost of inflation happens to be 11.6% at a point in time when it's taken forward to the next January, when the fares increase, that's part of the problem. And that's why our rail fares keep going up. I think they're the most expensive in Europe, and even pretty much when benchmarked against the world. And that is not a record that we should be proud of.
No.
And in effect, hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money is going into the rail network anyway, because Network Rail is in effect a public-owned organisation now, because Railtrack went bankrupt some years ago. We had the failure in London when again the track had to be brought back into public ownership from private, when that went bankrupt around 2000. And in effect, we've had to nationalise some of the rail franchises because they failed. And when they've done that, they've actually made money. So there is a huge argument to say that actually perhaps we should just renationalise everything, because we've partially done it anyway. And a lot of the improvements that are going on that have been announced, like a new station at Bradford, that's £2 billion. Doesn't say the track's going to come with it, but I'm sure it must for that cost. But that's all public money. That's all taxpayers' money that you and I are paying. Now, I don't have any problem with it going into the Midlands and the North, because, to be fair, their rail infrastructure has had decades of underinvestment, and there are known issues in Manchester and Liverpool and areas like that where people just can't get on trains because there's just not enough of them and they're overcrowded. Now, that's not going to motivate people to stop driving, unless you have a seat and some comfort to actually get to work, so you're not stressed out before you've even got behind your desk.
Yeah, if you've got the most expensive train fare in Europe and you can't even get on the train, then it doesn't make using public transport very attractive or appealing at all.
No, absolutely not.
Certainly not in comparison to just jumping in your car.
No, exactly. And in Colchester, for instance, the average journey that's done by the majority of cars is under 3 miles by a single driver. Now, imagine if you took all those cars off the road because people were compelled to use other forms of transport, but you can't expect people to unless they're cost effective and easy to use. You can walk down the road and just get a bus and it takes you to where you want to get to without being congested. And also it's decent and clean and isn't polluting. And unfortunately in Colchester, we tend to get the cast-offs of everybody else. When they've worn them out, they send them here to be worn out further. So although we have had investment in greener buses, with 25 buses being converted to be Euro 6 compliant, so that means they're the cleanest they can possibly be when dealing with diesel, and all the SOx and NOx that come out the engine are extracted out by an exhaust mechanism to basically stop the pollutants. That's fine, but some of our buses don't have that technology, and you can just see and smell what they're kicking out the back end, out the exhaust, and it's not good for people. And having been out, doing something in the community daily, I inhale that on a daily basis. You can taste and smell the fumes of traffic as it builds up. So yes, people need to feel compelled and motivated, but the alternatives have to be good.
Yeah. Just talk us through what's going on in terms of public transport along the northern approach.
So at the moment there is the rapid transit corridor, as it's now known, which has been in the plans for about 20 odd years. So I used to live on that development. I used to live in Dickinson Road, and it was always known about back as far as 2003. There'd be a bus lane going through there. It's only just come to fruition because of funding, and also it will have cycling infrastructure through there. But what that's meant is huge upheaval for local people. And also it's meant that all the trees that were planted there in 2003 have all had to be removed, which is just a travesty and something that we fought against. But this comes down to government policy now, because government has given funding for this. And there's a policy called LTN 120, which says if we give you money for any infrastructure, you have to include cycling provision in it. And that's why they've now got segregated cycling infrastructure and segregated bus infrastructure, which meant more of that land was needed. And that's why the bund and the fencing and everything's had to be taken out. Now, I can't say I'm happy about it, to be frank, because I think it's quite damaging to go around cutting down trees, although they will be planting more trees than have been taken out, but it takes time for them to grow at a time when we're talking about a climate emergency. But that said, the actual rapid transit corridor will eventually join up with the university and become a strategic piece of infrastructure, which means that you should be able to get a bus all the way through up to the east side of Colchester in dedicated bus infrastructure. And that is the only way to make it cost effective and quick for people to be able to get around the city, to have an alternative. If you don't provide that and make it cost effective, have good quality buses and good infrastructure, people won't use it. It's as simple as that. And ultimately, the bus services are run by commercial organisations. And so they will want to make a profit. There's nothing wrong with a profit, but at the end of the day, it is also a public service. And so they'll only run buses on routes and at times when it's going to make money.
Well, the positive about something being profitable is that it's sustainable, isn't it? It doesn't require outside input, but like you quite rightly say, if it has to be fit for purpose, it has to be regular and clean and efficient and do the job as it's intended. And if you can't get a bus, or the fumes that are kicking out the back of it are making you feel unwell, then why would you? Why would you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things I'd like to see happen in Colchester is similar to what's happening in Manchester. Certainly what you've got up in London is you've got Transport for London, and I know Mayor Andy Burnham is moving forwards, and I think they're looking at it in East Yorkshire as well, is to basically nationalise public transport. So all the buses and everything is integrated and it all sits under one authority. And in effect, it should drive down prices, still wash its face in terms of operational cost versus income, but give services that people need and want.
It certainly seems to work in London, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does. Obviously, it's been impacted by COVID. You know, we can't ignore that fact that passenger numbers in the city are down by quite a significant percentage, which also affects income, of course, on the tube and on the bus network. So that's why they've had to take a serious look at the books, because they're not getting the income, and I think they've had to have help from government. But taking all that into account when you're trying to do that in Manchester or East Yorkshire, you should know what the numbers look like now based on what things are today, and therefore make it work appropriately and cost effectively.
But could something like that work here in Colchester? Could there be a transport to Colchester?
So. Yeah, I think so. We've talked about it before. Now, of course, Colchester City Council is not a unitary authority. Essex is the transport authority, so they would have to be the ones that really try to push it forwards. But given that government is trying to push devolution down and looking to get mayors in most places, who knows what the democratic system will look like in the future, and what councils will look like in the future. As government looks to change it. Now, a change of government next year may push those powers down to allow us to do that.
So just talk me through that then, because you said that the government's trying to push down devolution. What could that mean in terms of transport, or Colchester having an MP and a mayor or a unitary authority? Just give us some background on.
Yeah, of course.
I'm sure it's a point that people really struggle with. I've done, and I've talked to you separately about this. The fact that when there's a problem with roads in Colchester, it has to go and be organised by Essex County Council in Chelmsford.
Yeah. Yes. So you're absolutely right. And in terms of unitary authority, what does that really mean? It means that a council is responsible for all services. So that's adult social care, education, roads, infrastructure, etc. At the moment, Colchester is responsible for grass cutting, collecting the rubbish, for planning, for collecting council tax. It doesn't keep it, it gives it back to the other authorities. But Essex has the gargantuan amount of council tax out of your bill, and it is also responsible for education, for infrastructure, transport, adult social care, the big ticket expensive items. If you take somewhere like Thurrock or Southend, they are responsible for all of those services without question. So if you go to your local councillor and complain about a pothole, it's your local councillor in Thurrock or Southend that can at least raise it. Now, I'm not saying I don't raise stuff with Essex, of course I do all the time, but I'm not an Essex County Council councillor. I'm a Colchester City councillor. And what that means is you're passing it off to another authority. And what people in Colchester get fed up with, and other places in Essex, is this constant, it's not us, it's them. Now, it's not an us and them. It is strictly factual, because Essex can't deal with planning matters in Colchester or collecting the rubbish, because it's not their budget, it's not their legal responsibility, and therefore it is nothing to do with them. It's up to Colchester. So if somebody complains to me about their rubbish or a planning issue or anything related, I can deal with it, and I can go to officers of Colchester and try and get some help. And that's the real difference. That is the real difference. Now, we have looked at unitary authorities before to say, give us the money, give us the responsibility, and we'll get on with it. But government, the Tory government, outlawed any more unitary authorities. So they're not allowed. So we could go and petition for it, but government just wouldn't allow it. So we can't do that. What's currently being looked at the moment in Essex is the potentially talking about a mayor of Essex, or cutting Essex into north and south, so South Essex, North Essex, and having a mayor. And government is basically trying to sweeten this to get rid of councils, to flatten the cost of democracy, and to have less councillors, but have much bigger areas, which means that those areas would be responsible, I suppose, for all of the services, and possibly have an elected mayor, like other areas like Manchester or East Yorkshire or London. And why is this happening? Why are these conversations going on at the moment? It's all money. So the Tory government is all for streamlining government, bigger structures, lower cost, so in effect you'd have one chief executive, not six, because you've got, 6 councils in Essex, or whatever the figure is, Chelmsford, Braintree, Colchester, Tendring, etc. You'd save money potentially. But you see how Essex operates as a much bigger authority across most of Essex that look after highways, and you look at Colchester that's more local. And certainly both organisations are not perfect. No organisation is perfect. But I think the people can work out what do they prefer, where do they think they get better service from. So if a pothole's reported, does it get fixed? No. Do they get a good response? No, because it's a much bigger authority over a much bigger footprint. And Essex has one of the biggest road networks, I think, in the UK. I think they say it's over like 9,000 miles or something like that. So it's a big responsibility. And so making it bigger, is that a good thing? I'm not always sure. You look at takeovers of companies and they merge and they get bigger. And sometimes they get too big when the Competition Commission comes in and starts to ask questions. That's the same principle. Is big better? And I'm not always, you might make it cheaper to run, but will it be effective? And that's my big question. So these conversations are early stages, but this is what potentially government is doing. And what they're trying to say to sweeten it is, if you do this, we'll give you a load more money. That's what they're trying to do, which in effect might be fine short term, but we know what government does, because governments give grants to councils. Councils in the UK are underfunded by £33 billion. So you can just imagine, if this devolution goes through, I suspect if a change of government, they'll put the brakes on it, to be honest, I suspect, because other parties may not agree with it. It's more a Tory ideal, and that's why it's being driven. So we'll see what happens in the future, but that is what is currently being looked at.
Would that help people with their potholes? Because it's a big issue, isn't it?
It's a huge issue. Do I think it will help? Probably not, because if you've got an even bigger authority, I'm not quite sure how it would help. What it would do, I think, is then make an authority responsible for a greater number of things, but whether it does all those things well, being a bigger authority, because at the end of the day, government would be looking to drive down costs ultimately. That's why they're ripping out democracy, or ripping out councils, or trying to reduce councils and make them bigger, because that's less employees, less people. All that comes at a cost. But does it make it less effective? Probably not. It probably makes it it makes it less effective, in my opinion. I think getting stuff done will be harder. That's my view.
There does seem to be a doubling up, though, doesn't there? Is it just to play devil's advocate? If you had a mayor of North Essex, which went from Clacton to the other side of Chelmsford, say, and everywhere in between, that if you had one organisation rather than 2 or 3 different organisations that are running the same services, might that be more efficient?
So, I mean, we're already aligning services. So, for instance, where there's IT, we will be sharing those with other councils. Where there are HR platforms, we'll be using the same service provider or the same council service provider, so that we don't each have our own HR and payroll platform or service. So that's already happening. So where there's, sharing procurement teams, for instance, we work with Braintree and they take the lead on some of the procurement. So rather than us each having a procurement manager, you have a team of experts in different councils and you have what we call a shared service. So you could argue that's happening already. It's happened with the North Essex Parking Partnership, where we've brought all the parking services together under one roof. And they're controlled and managed and led by one organisation. So that is already happening to some degree where there's value to be had. And I think that's commendable, but the people of Colchester would not see any difference because it's being delivered through Colchester, but it might be Braintree is doing the payroll of the staff in Colchester. So what? They're being paid, and it just means we're not paying for a payroll manager in Colchester, for instance, and vice versa. So nothing wrong with that. I think where things fail are things like the road repairs. Now, in fairness to Essex, it's because they haven't got the money. They need £80 million a year to repair roads and pavements. They've got less than 40. So, like any household budget, if the money's not there, you have to make priority calls. But that said, that is down to government not funding the road repairs.
So that's the real reason then. So I think people would, when we've talked about this separately to recording today, I was certainly shocked to hear that the cost of maintaining the roads is 8 million a year, which is a lot anyway. But in fact that they haven't got 50% of that, then is it any wonder that the roads are in the sorry state that they're in? That's the underlying reason.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's the first time, credit to Councillor Lee Scott. He's the first person that's actually come out and said it publicly and said, look, sorry, guys, we haven't got the money. We're in a state of managed decline. And that's actually what Essex call it. It's a term they use now. So our roads are roads and pavements and infrastructure are in a state of managed decline. And that's what we're doing. Of course, the challenge with that and the worry is that might be the case. But that means in future to bring all that back up to a good standard, which hopefully in the future when the economy is better and there's more public money will happen, but it's going to be 3 times the cost because costs go up as they have been. And that means you're playing catch up for decades. It's no different than the investment in the underground, for instance. For decades and decades, it had underinvestment and was failing. There's been decades of good investment in TfL and in the underground, and now all of that's being cut because the money's not there, which means we're going to be going back to, do I fix this or do I fix that? And that means the infrastructure in decades to come will start to fail because we've not invested in it. It's the same principle.
Yeah, if it's 40 million shortfall a year, then it's not that you can just bring it back up to 80. You have to repay the previous every year that you miss.
Exactly. And you keep adding on top of that with the cost of inflation and everything else. It's going to be hundreds of millions of pounds required before you know it to even get back, and years of work because they aren't workforces to do it either. There's not you can't just suddenly find another 1,000 employees to go around filling piles. They're just not there. They're not trained. They're not on the books.
So what can be done?
Well, I think this is part of the problem of cuts, that it's all short-termism. Use HS2 as a good example. It might look good now to reinvest or recycle £36 billion into other projects, but it's all short-termism. So, for instance, £2 bus fares is great up until the end of next year, and they are good to try and encourage people onto buses. What it's not doing is putting money into infrastructure for the future, for people's children and grandchildren and for the climate. It's all short-termism, and this is the problem, I think, very much with both councils and governments at the moment. Is it short-termism? We're not taking a sort of 15, 20, 30, 40-year view. We're taking a 3 to 5 year view, if that, or even maybe a 1 year view in the case of the Conservative Party, because they'll probably get wiped out next year. And then a new government's got to come in and try and stitch all this stuff back together. And again, they will, of course, have challenges because it's down to funding again.
Yeah. So, yeah, big investment needed over a long period of time, but that doesn't seem to be forthcoming from the current government based on their actions in the last week or so.
Agreed, totally.
Lovely. Thank you, Martin, for your time today and your insight and your thoughts and comments. Been really interesting talking to you, and look forward to.
No, thank you. Thanks. Good questions and challenges, look forward to catching up on the next one.
Okay. Thanks, Martin.
Cheers. Thank you.